Good afternoon and welcome to our February Hawkeye Parent and Family webinar. My name is Danielle Martinez and I work in the Office of Academic Support and Retention and will be the moderator for today's webinar. If you're unfamiliar with our series, we hope that this series is on the first Friday of each month from noon to 1, and we hope that it provides you with up-to-date information that might apply to your students' transition at the University of Iowa. We know that you as parent and family members play a vital role in student success, and we hope that these webinars provide a platform for us to provide you with resources that will help you support your student in their success. If you can't attend every live webinar, that's okay. We do record them and post them later both on our website and on YouTube. Additionally, all links presented in the webinar will be sent out after the presentation and will also be in the video's description online. I know today we have lots and lots of links and resources, so we'll make sure to include all of those. For more information and future topics or to sign up for the webinars, please visit parents.uiowa.edu and click on the Resources tab. Each webinar has a short presentation and then a question and answer portion where you can get your questions answered by our campus experts. So today's webinar is proactive planning for next year. And I know that even when I was putting this together, I was like, are we really planning for next year already? But we are. So it might seem and feel a little bit early, but the way that the academic year cycle continues, it's a really good idea for us to be starting to have those conversations now. And so we wanted to provide you with some up-to-date information. We have three wonderful campus partners with us today. The first is Maureen Schaefer, who's the Senior Associate Director in the Academic Advising Center, and you may recognize her from some of our previous webinars, such as Managing the Winter Break Transition. We also have Virginia Ibrahim Olin, who's the Assistant Director for Assignments and Contracts in University Housing and Dining, and Eric Rosso, the Assistant Director for Outreach Programs and Services for the Iowa Memorial Union, or the IMU, which tends to be one of our student hubs on campus. So all three will share information about what you might need to know to get your student ready for the 2017-2018 academic year. Can't believe we're already there. So we'll go ahead and start off with Maureen from the Academic Advising Center.
Great. Well, thank you, Danielle, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be with you today. Now that students are back to class and really into the third week of the semester, it won't be long, as Danielle mentioned, before we start to think about planning for next year. So I want to share a few things with you regarding academics and academic advising for the semester. Very soon, our advisors at the Academic Advising Center will send out their email invitation to students to let them know it's time for a spring planning appointment. These are the appointments where they touch base about current classes, discuss their major or exploration process, they go over their degree audit, and start brainstorming classes for fall. Now, this process is a little bit different depending on the student. We find that some students students in general are kind of in varying situations at this time of year. Some are still in the major they started with, and they're continuing to plan with their advisor about that degree program and perhaps what they might add to that major. And at this point, those students are writing out their plans on a multi-semester planning sheet so they get a sense for what the next 3 years will look like for them academically. Other students may have found that after the fall semester, they're not so sure about their original major and they want to discuss other options. These students sometimes feel bad about this or see it as a sign of failure, and we really try to let them know that this is a natural part of what happens in college as they learn more about themselves and college classes. The third group are open majors who were exploring in the fall and are probably still in the midst of figuring out what they want to do. Some of these students may have engaged in some exploration in the fall, but not all of them. Some students weren't sure on their major in the fall, but they really weren't too worried about it either. We aren't in a position to hurry them, but we do want to share that as they start to plan classes for the fall of their sophomore year, they may find that it'll be easier if they at least know some of the options of what they want to explore. So now is the time for all of these students to start planning for fall. And many students have the same advisor from fall, but some students who had transfer credit, either from dual enrollment, AP, or transfer work, may have been switched to departmental advising after the fall semester. We have a two-tiered advising system at Iowa that starts with most students being advised at the Academic Advising Center to start, and then at a certain point, once they earn a certain number of hours, many students move on to advising in their major, either by a professional advisor or faculty member. So students can check their MyUI account to see their current advising location. I have a screenshot here of what they see on MyUI, and if they have more than one major, it could be that they have more than one advisor as well. But MyUI is their best place to check on this. Now, we view academic advising as an important process so that we can help students discuss their options at Iowa and make informed choices about their education. Through this process, we guide them, and we're also teaching them how to navigate the university and take charge of their education. Part of this process, actually a very important part of this process, is understanding the degree audit. The degree audit is the official record of their progress towards their degree, and we consult the audit in advising appointments, but it's really important for students to know that they have access to this document at any time on their MyUI account, and no matter who their advisor is, this is really their checkpoint to know where they stand in terms of fulfilling requirements. Conversations that we have with students in the spring oftentimes relate to exploration, and as I mentioned, many students are still trying to figure out which major is best for them, and we'll talk to them about the various ways to explore, and we most often use the Academic Advising Center website and then the Career Center website as well, and both of those options really have a lot of different links to connect students to not only major and career assessments through the Career Center, but just information about all of the majors at Iowa. So you can certainly encourage your students to engage with those. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline for registration. So summer registration for students planning to take courses at Iowa this summer is the week of March 6th. Summer classes are on MyUI now, and students can start having conversations with their advisor about those plans. If your student is thinking about using the Summer Hawk Tuition Grant, please note that there are some recent changes in that program that are being communicated with students, and students should consult the updated information on the Academic Advising Center website. Fall registration begins on April 10th and will run for 2 weeks through April 21st. Students at the Academic Advising Center need to see their advisor in person in order to be authorized to register for summer and fall. So now's the perfect time to start engaging in those conversations. Some students plan to take summer classes at a school near their home, and during advising appointments we'll certainly talk with students about how to find out about how classes from other schools transfer to Iowa, and that's an important process. We never want somebody to assume that something will transfer from another school. We really want to help them use the tools to find out how classes will transfer. And summer can also be a good time for students to continue their major and career exploration. This is something they can discuss with their advisor and with you. There may be options in your community for them to do some volunteering or even job shadowing to explore different career fields. And the last thing that I want to mention about academics is the academic transition to college is still underway in the spring. Some students did really well in the fall and were happy with their grades, and perhaps some struggled a little bit. No matter what happened in the fall, they have a new set of classes this spring with new expectations, and the academic adjustment continues. It can be helpful for you as parents to convey what we convey to your students, that the most successful students don't do it alone. They get support when needed, they talk with their professors and their advisors, and they use campus resources. If these are not habits your student developed in the fall, it can be a great goal for the spring. On their MyUI account, they see a link for academic support, and this takes them to the Tutor Iowa website, which is really the best source for all academic resource information at Iowa. And they even have information on quiet study spaces and academic tips worksheets, such as how to talk with your professor. I think it's a good thing to mention because we want students to know that the academic adjustment does continue. We certainly don't expect them to have it all figured out yet. So we look forward to talking with your students this spring and helping them plan their next steps. Advising is one of those things that I think you get more out of it the more you put into it. So we really appreciate your help in encouraging your students to come see us. So now I'm going to turn it over to Virginia, who's going to talk with you a little bit about housing options for next year.
Hi, good afternoon, families. It's nice to meet with you this afternoon. My name is Virginia Ibrahimolin, and I'm our Assistant Director in University Housing and Dining. And my staff oversees the reapplication process for students to return to the residence halls for 2017-18. And so one of the number one questions we receive is, can my student live on campus for 2 years? And my answer is, you betcha. We are knee deep in the room reapplication process, but I want you to not stress out. Please know that there is still time for them to submit their application. And one thing that's a little bit different from their first year that they applied is that the reapplication process is not first come, first serve. The reapplication process is one that as long as they submit an application by 11:59 on February 13th, they will receive a room selection time slot. And I can guarantee you that one of your students will be the one to submit their application at 11:58. So I look forward to receiving that. On the screen before you, you can see a timeline of our events. Our application opened last week, and as of this afternoon, we had 874 students who have already submitted their application. We are excited to welcome as many students who are interested in returning to the residence halls as would like to. And so the application process will close on the 13th. If they happen to miss that deadline, don't you worry, on the 14th we will open the wait list. On February 15th, we hold a very popular apartment lottery, which I'll talk about in a minute. On the 17th, we will email all students who've completed their application a room selection time for them to log in online. And then that online room selection will take place from February 27th to March 3rd. So they've got a whole week to kind of shop around and find something that might work well for them. On March 7th, we'll email the student their contract letter, and that's going to be their official letter saying, hey, you've got a spot for next year if you accept it. They'll have a few weeks to really consider that offer over winter, not winter, we already had winter break, over spring break. And then on March 21st, their housing contract becomes legally binding for next year. And on the 22nd, if a student decided to cancel their housing application, we will then start to offer students on the wait list. So what I'd like to talk to you all a little bit about is living learning communities for returning students. The majority of our students who return to the halls will live in what's called the Hawks Up Living Learning Community. And this is designed with the second year in mind. Most of our students will have, their feet underneath them. They'll understand how to get in and out around campus, connect with academic advising, and hopefully with the tutoring services. We cannot stress that enough. But then we will also encourage them and help them create opportunities to connect with community service, with career exploration, and then be really thinking about internships and opportunities post-graduation. It's never too soon to connect with the Career Center as well. We have a few living learning communities that also welcome returning residents. And there is a link once a student has submitted their online application that they could apply to join All In, the Be Wise Living Learning Community, ROTC, or Young Gifted in Black. And it's a very short questionnaire that just asks the students, why would you like to return to these living learning communities? And as someone who has gotten to see the responses, it's really heartwarming to see how many of our students want to rejoin their same living learning community or try something new because they'd like to connect with first-year students and help them in their transition to campus. On a fun note, we also have a formal mentor program that is available. And so if your student is looking for a job for next year and might be interested in being a mentor in our All In or Young Gifted and Black Living Learning communities, have them check out the housing website because that application is open until February 10th. So now I'd like to share with you about the ever-exciting apartment lottery. So all students who are interested in living in one of our apartments for next year must A, reapply online. That's really important that that's the starting piece. If they successfully submit their application by February 13th, then they will be emailed a form that they can submit to our office by February 14th. And we've already received several of them. Again, it is not first come, first serve, so they've got a few days to submit that yet. What they'll do is they'll turn that paper form into our office in Burge Hall, and then students will come to the apartment lottery on February 15th in Peterson Hall, and we will do it bingo style. We will pull names out of a hat, and as we pull numbers and names, each student or a group of students that is interested in living in one of our apartments will come on up and select from those available. We have 348 spaces for students, and we have found that while the random process is intriguing and it might be a little stressful for a few, it is the most fair way that we can offer out our limited apartment offerings for everyone who might be interested. Now, here's a smattering so that way you all can understand where the apartments are located and what the breakdown is. Again, don't feel like you've got to jot all these numbers down, but we think it's helpful for people to have some perspective. We have 3 leased apartments off campus that University Housing and Dining manages, and those are Bloomington, Centerstone, and Dubuque South. And those have 40 spaces, 108 spaces, and then 51 different spaces available. We also have some apartments in our more traditional style buildings in Hillcrest. We've got 4 quad apartments. In Mayflower, we've got some apartments for students, again, a couple of quad apartments, which are very popular, and then some triple apartments. And then over in Park Lawn, we've got, which is a very unique building. It houses just around 100 students. Not a lot of people know about it, but for those who live there, they really love it. And if your student might be interested in living in a smaller community with just one roommate, this is something that I would highly recommend for them. The nifty piece about Park Lawn, if they're interested in it as well, is that it's on the west side, so we know that it's a little bit different from our other locations. And what we've done this year is that students actually can skip the apartment lottery. They can contact the Park Lawn staff today and pick their apartment if they wanted to. That's just a perk for that specific building because it is smaller and unique, and we want students to be able to check it out. So on our special notes, if they've applied online and want to join Park Lawn, they skip that apartment lottery, they just visit with Jennifer. She's the hall secretary. She'll help them tour the building and pick a room if that's something they're interested in. But if they wanted to try for one of the other apartments, they could, and we want to make sure that they're not feeling stressed out. Some students have, 5 friends that they know they all want to live together, or 2 or 3 friends that want to live together, but we occasionally have single individuals who say, I'm open to living with anyone, I'd just like to join an apartment, and we don't want them to feel left out. So if they are an individual, they still just submit that application to our office, and on apartment lottery night, if their name comes up, we'll help them fill out another apartment that might be lacking 1 or 2 people. And so it works out best for everybody involved. And I can say for those roommate relationships that we've had this past year, some of those have been actually quite successful. So no group, no problem. Now, if your student is one that is thinking about a more traditional residence hall experience for a second year in a row, that room selection will take place online at the end of February, and those selection times will be emailed to the student. I know that we copy families on some important broad messages, but this message will go directly to your students. So that's something that they can watch out for. Now, selection times are based on the number of semesters that a student has lived in the residence halls, which means that if they have lived with us for 2 years, that student would have an earlier selection time than someone who has just lived with us for 1 year or even for just their first semester this spring. Again, we will have enough space for everyone who is interested in returning to the residence halls. I know last year we did not, and we wound up putting folks onto a wait list preemptively, but thankfully we were able to offer everyone on that wait list a space. So you all can relax if you have talked with your student about returning to the residence halls. The important piece is that they must reapply by February 13th. We have several halls that will have space available. Burge Hall will have space in their BWise Living Learning Community, specifically for women who are majoring in the STEM fields. Our new Catlett Hall, which is quite popular, Courier Hall, and Hillcrest Hall, which tend to be very popular for returning students because they know about, some of the single rooms that are available there. Peterson, our other new building, and then in Slater, we will have spaces specifically for students who participate in Young, Gifted, and Black, all in the ROTC Living Learning Communities. Now, I know a lot of families are interested in how do people live with a roommate in their second year. And if they have someone in mind, what they will do is both students will pick the same room at the same time. And if Sam and Chris wind up with two different access times, Sam can pick a room and make sure that there is another space available for Chris in that space. But perhaps that space is filled when it's time for Chris to pick a room. That's okay. What'll happen is then during the second student's login period, the two students will just find another room that has two spaces available. We don't allow students to hold space or block it for someone else, and that's just in order to be fair to everyone else. If your student is looking for a room and does not have a preferred roommate, that's okay too. They'll be able to see if someone else has already selected that room. They'll be able to log in and view a profile of that student who has already reserved one half of the room and try to decide if the two of them might be compatible roommates. A good important piece to remember is online only tells us so much, and whether these two people who are going to live together next year have known each other since they were 5 years old or just 5 minutes, communication is the key to all solid roommate relationships, and we can talk with you all about that later. A new offering for next year is gender-inclusive housing. We regularly receive requests from families that have siblings who might want to live together but happen to identify with different genders. And so for next year, gender-inclusive housing is available for friends and siblings. Students will check a box on their housing application. This is an opt-in program, and we also ask that they sign an agreement with our office. And as they're completing the housing application process before February 13th, they'll be emailed the appropriate documents and then just return them to our office in 4141 Burge Hall. If your student is currently receiving ADA or medical accommodations related to their housing, not a worry, we will continue that for next year. They will still need to resubmit or reapply for housing online, and then what they will do is they will confirm their accommodations to continue for next year. We're back one more. Bear with us for one quick second, folks. We're going to come on back through. Almost one more. Okay, thank you for dealing with our technical difficulties. So we're talking about ADA accommodations. Number one, all students need to reapply. If your student receives accommodations this year, they'll get an email from one of my colleagues, Colleen, who will say, hey, just want to check in and make sure that your accommodations that you get this year are the same ones you'll need for next year. If your student needs to change their accommodations, or if your student has never requested them before but may benefit from a housing accommodation, that's great. We would love to hear from them. And so they check the box on the online application that will automatically email them the important documentation they need, and they can schedule a brief meeting with Colleen to discuss what their needs might be. We're talking 5-10 minutes, nothing too drastic, but just enough so that way they understand what the process is and that they know who the right people in our office to talk to. We will have them pick a room online, and we'll work with them about identifying a space that meets their needs. And if they have never submitted documentation to our office, that priority deadline is March 20th to receive all of that documentation. So academic year housing contracts. Once the online room selection process has ended, students will be emailed contracts on March 7th. They will have until the 21st, so they'll have a few weeks to decide, am I really going to accept this offer of housing, or would I like to cancel with absolutely no penalty? And that's a pretty unique offer. Most times when people pick a room or sign an apartment lease, they're locked in as soon as they sign, but we would release them up until March 21st with no penalty. Afterwards, however, we would have to have some discussion about what the finances are related to that contract release. And then on March 22nd, our housing staff will begin to offer students on the wait list rooms that may still be available for next year. A few important recommendations that I would like to share with you all from some of our staff is, number one, allow your student to complete the process. I know that sometimes it can feel daunting, or they might think that they're busy, but honestly, it's 9 screens for them to read through, and if they read everything, it will only take them 15 minutes. Most complete it in about 3 to 4, so I can tell that they're not reading all of the fine print, but we encourage them to read it. Talk with your student about multiple options. Catlett Hall is going to be a big building, but it won't be able to house all of our returning students. And so I want people to be open, so that way if for some reason they don't win the apartment lottery or they're not able to get into Catlett, they're still excited about some of the other options that may be available to them. I think it's important for families to talk about what budget expectations are and what their options are for living both on or off campus. University Housing and Dining, we will have rates for rooms as students are selecting them online, and our rates for this year will be fairly comparable next year, so that's something that you all can talk about. Ask your student guiding questions as far as what they're looking for in their housing experience, and encourage reflection about their current roommate relationships. Some we know have gone splendidly, others have been a little bumpy, but that doesn't mean that they're not learning from it. And so it's important to talk to your student about what's worked well in their roommate relationship, what might they want to do differently. You've known your student for 18, 19 years now, and you might be able to help them identify and understand some of those hot button items that could be challenging for roommates to live with. And then the other thing to really talk with your student about is how can they communicate their expectations with their new roommates. Again, whether they've known them 5 years or 5 minutes, we always want to encourage as much communication with roommates about living with one another as possible. And then lastly, if your student has questions, please do encourage them to contact us. I know many of you are proactive and have emailed and called and talked with our staff already, but we want you and your student to know that we're not scary people. And so student walk-ins are welcome at any time between 8 and 5 to talk with one of our student ambassadors or our housing assignment coordinators. If you are going to assist your student in an email, we ask that you please copy your student on that message so they know that you're emailing us, and then also too that you include their full name and university ID number in all communication. That way we can make sure that we are answering your question and your students' questions as thoroughly as possible. You may have a number of questions as a result of this information. We have quite a bit of information on our housing website, and I'll be taking broad questions later. But again, if you have individual questions related to your students' experience, particularly around ADA accommodations, we encourage them to reach out to us one-on-one. Okay. So thank you so much for listening. At this point right now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eric, who's going to talk about living off campus.
Hi, I'm happy to join you this afternoon. I'm Eric Rosso from the Iowa Memorial Union, or the IMU, and one of the outreach services we provide at the IMU is our off-campus housing service. So this time of year, many students are considering their housing options. Some of your students may have already made the decision to move off campus. Typically and historically at the University of Iowa, students may start deciding that they want to live off campus in November, December, and then many more start to make the decision into January and February. So many of those recommendations that Virginia talked about, I would strongly encourage your students to think about as well when they're moving off campus. I think it's very important that students, when they begin to look at those options off campus, think about where it is they want to live in proximity to campus. Many students choose to live in the neighborhoods very close to campus, within walking distance. Some students will choose to live in communities that are adjacent to Iowa City and are served on a bus line to, or they can ride a bus to campus, etc. So I think those options and looking into those options are a great place to start with your student. The next thing is to look at finances. Different apartments, different amenities, different living situations all have different costs. So it's very important that your student look into what those costs are going to be before they sign into a lease. It's also very important that your student think about roommates. How many roommates do they want to have? Who will be sharing in the costs of having an apartment or a house off campus? Who's going to be responsible for paying the bills? One huge conflict I think that comes up oftentimes in off-campus housing situations is who is in charge of the bill collection, who's paying the bills, who's collecting the money. So it's very good at the forefront to really figure out that and who is going to be in charge of that. And there are some new services out there that students can utilize online that allow them to pay their payments via their credit cards or their debit cards to the other student, and so there's lots of different options to make sure that that goes, happens flawlessly and doesn't ruin relationships in the process. So we have a website, offcampushousing.uiowa.edu, that allows students to browse all the available properties, advertise their rooms or their apartments if they want to sublet, and then they can also go on there to find a property or to become a roommate. If they are looking for a room, or if they're looking for an apartment and someone has one available, they're able to go on there and search for that or express interest in that. Our off-campus housing fairs or off-campus housing expos are held during the fall and spring semesters at the IMU. In the fall, typically held in November, and then in the spring, held in February or March. And so this year, the expo is held March 8th from 11 to 2 in the IMU Hubbard Commons. So March 8th from 11 to 2 in the Hubbard Commons. We typically have about 15 area property managers there that students can chat with, learn more about the properties, set up a time if they'd like to go tour a specific property, talk about the finances, talk about deposits, talk about what their monthly rent will be, talk about what's included in that rent, if they are going to be paying for water, if they're going to be paying for cable, if that's included. So a lot of things to think through when they rent their first apartment or their first off-campus living space. Student Legal Services on campus also provides many resources for students who are thinking about moving off campus. It's very, very important that students understand when they sign a lease, it is a legal and binding document that they cannot get out of. So I think it's not all students realize that, and many students will come to Student Legal Services after they've signed it, they haven't reviewed it. So it's very important that if a student is concerned when they read through that document, I guess that's the first thing too, is having them actually go through and read that lease so that they understand what is in there, what they're responsible for, what charges may be, what their monthly rent will be, how they even need to pay for that rent, whether they can pay with one check or if they can pay with 5. Some of that is all stipulated in leases. So Student Legal Services is free to UI students for them to go in and have their lease looked over. They also have a very thorough rental guide on their website that over the years they have had multiple questions that they've really developed into this great FAQ document or rental guide that students can go in and search and find the answers to many frequently asked questions. They also have several programs throughout the year related to landlord and tenant issues, and one is coming up in April, and that is Renting 101. It's April 10th at 6 o'clock p.m. in the Iowa Memorial Union as well. So this is a great time for students to learn more about living off campus, learn more about leases, learn more about renting, learn more about what they are truly responsible for and what their property manager or their landlord is responsible for. So this is a great time for them to come and learn and ask questions, and that once again is April 10th at 6 o'clock p.m. in the Iowa Memorial Union.
Awesome. Thanks so much for Maureen and Virginia and Eric for all the great information both on academics and housing options as we get ready for the 2017, 2018 academic year. All right. So we're now going to move into the question and answer portion of our webinar. Please remember that we have lots of people attending and our presenters are unable to answer questions about specifics of your student's experience, but can provide some general information that might be helpful in guiding your student. So if you have a question, type it in the question box on the side, and then I'll read it aloud so that folks on the webinar can hear what's sort of going on, and then we'll have our presenters be available to answer. If you're unable to get your question answered during the webinar, you can send us an email at uc-retention@uiowa.edu, and we'll make sure that a university staff member follows up with you to answer any questions that you might have beyond this. So we'll just take a few minutes. You might hear some silence as we wait to see for any questions rolling in. And we have our first question. So do we offer dining option plans for off-campus students?
Yes, hi, this is Virginia with Housing and Dining, and we do. We have many students who live off campus that choose to have a meal plan. The meal plan options are the same. It would be the gold plan, which is the unlimited, the black plan, which is which is 220 meals throughout the course of a semester, which is about two a day or 14 a week. And then very popular is the Hawkeye plan. And that plan is 75 meals over the course of a semester. And those meals can be used in either our marketplace dining facilities, which next year will be located in Burge, Hillcrest, and in Catlett Hall, or those flex meals can also be used at a variety of retail locations on campus, especially the ever popular Street Hawk food truck, which has great falafel. So thank you for asking. Yeah, it is really good.
And there will be more information about those dining plans at the Off-Campus Housing Expo in March as well. So they will have a table there where your student can chat with those folks from campus dining, and they can learn more about those meal plan options for when they live off campus.
Virginia, we have another question about rates. So will the Catlett rates be released before room selection?
Yes, Pam, your question is a great one. Thank you for asking. And if you're interested about what the Catlett Hall will cost, it will be priced similarly to Peterson Hall. So as you look on the housing website, on the very front of it, it's housing.uiowa.edu. Right in the middle of the page, you'll see a blue link that says rates. And if you see the rates for Peterson Hall, those same rates will apply for Catlett. Overall, our rates will increase just slightly for next year, and those are still being finalized and approved by all the powers that be, but we will have estimates available when your student is selecting a room.
So we have another question, more housing questions. So this might be for Eric and or Virginia. So do you recommend a student to apply for on-campus housing just in case they can't get their preferred off-campus housing choice?
That is a really tough situation, and I would say the answer is going to be different for each student and each family. I think that if you know that your student would be interested in living in the residence halls for another year, then I would absolutely recommend that they do reapply to live in housing. If they select a room and then or win the apartment lottery with us, their housing contract will become binding on March 21st. So there is a little bit of buffer room for them to make a decision. The only challenge is that if they have reserved a room and we've offered them a contract for it, they're taking that space away from someone else who might be very interested in that room. So I would talk with them about that. But it is a great option for them to consider, and we know that when students return to the halls, they do well academically in their second year. Please note, though, if your student is more serious about living off campus and they sign with us on campus, they would have to cancel by March 21st. Cancellations after March 21st would not be permitted for them to go live off campus.
So there's a question about if a student has a scholarship that covers room and board, can they apply this to an off-campus housing apartment? I think I might be the best person to answer this question. So it really depends. If the scholarship is sent through the University of Iowa, so if it's an Old Gold or Advantage Iowa grant that sort of takes care of some of those living expenses pieces, the student's scholarship would be applied to the student's bill, and then it would come out in the form of a refund check, and then they could use that additional money to pay for off-campus housing. If the scholarship is privatized or by a third party, you might just want to check with whoever the donor is to see if it's stipulations about on or off campus, because we don't want students to lose out on that experience and or money. So I think Kristen is the person who asked that question. If you want to send us an email at uc-retention@uiowa.edu with some of the more specifics about the scholarship, we're happy to take a look into that. So we have another question. So if a student chooses to get an apartment without roommates, any advice on to how to stay involved? And we'll probably give this one to Eric. She has a good network, but just any other additional help.
Yes, so we really strongly encourage all students to get involved and to stay involved during their time on campus. And I think absolutely your student will be able to stay involved at the university without having roommates. Where I work in the Iowa Memorial Union, is the Office for Student Activities, Student Programs, Student Involvement. So we have over 550 registered student organizations at the university that your student could be a part of. So I would strongly encourage them to browse through all of those organizations at csil.uiowa.edu. I think students really just, your living situation I don't think is really dependent upon how involved you choose to get on campus. We have students that do get involved because of some things that their roommates have taken them to, but we have lots and lots of students who take the initiative to get out there, go to student organization fairs, go to student organization meetings, and find that one organization that they're passionate about, and they really build a depth of leadership experience in that organization during their time at the university. So I don't think their living situation is going to have a tremendous impact on whether or not they choose to get involved on campus. And from my own experience, I would say it's very easy to get involved on campus. And once you get involved in one thing, it's going to trickle into other things. And before you know it, you're involved in 2 or 3, 4 things. So there is an art, though, in finding a balance of not getting over-involved. So.
For sure. We have another question about Catlett, Virginia. Are there any single rooms, and off the top of your head, do you know how many?
Yes, there are a handful of single rooms in Catlett Hall, but I will be frank, the majority of them are actually double rooms. So if your student is interested in living in Catlett, I would encourage them to be ready to live with a roommate. That's really what I would recommend. It is designed to have as many students, be in the building as it can, and so double rooms are what most of them are.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, it looks like that is all the questions that we have for today. And we'll once again encourage folks that if you have additional questions, please feel free to let us know. They can be sent to uc-retention@uiowa.edu. And once again, I want to thank Maureen Schaefer, Virginia Ibrahim-Olin, and Eric Rosso for joining us today, for taking part of their busy Friday to hang out with us and speak with all of you. So just as a quick reminder, all webinars are posted online at uc.uiowa.edu/family resources or at parents.uiowa.edu. And click on resources. And if you were unable to get your question answered or have other ones, feel free to let us know. And join us for our next month's webinar to talk a little bit about academic support resources. As Maureen mentioned, that it's an ongoing process and there's always more to do and more to learn. And that will be on Friday, March 3rd from noon to 1, hosted by our office, Academic Support and Retention. Thank you so much for joining us today. And on Iowa, go Hawks!